to be able to do that? Okay, great. All righty. So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Tonight we have our wonderful longtime North Fork Audubon member and supporter and presenter, John Holzapfel. He has done many programs for us, and we're looking forward to this one. This is a new one for me. I haven't seen it. And he has many more, he's telling us. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce John.
Thank you, Peggy. And
I did forget one thing, John. I'm so sorry. I totally forgot. Excuse me. I was going to just announce our January programs. Sorry. So we've got our Friday morning birders is coming up this Friday, February 2nd at Orient Point County Park with Ben Bolduck. We're going to meet at the parking lot there at 8 a.m. And all this information obviously is on our website. So please, if you're interested, go on, you'll get all the details and you can sign up. And then Saturday, February 17th is our Great Backyard Family Bird Walk. Every year, this is put together by Cornell Ornithology Lab and National Audubon. They sponsor the Great Backyard Bird Count. It's always over Washington's birthday weekend. And it's basically 4 days where anybody can just observe birds in their own backyard, birds at their feeders, or go out and take a walk and send in all the birds that they see through eBird and Merlin. So at the walk, if anybody doesn't know how to use Merlin or eBird, we're going to explain how to use it. And Kira Leonardi is going to lead the walk. Families welcome, beginning birders are welcome as well. And then on Tuesday, February 20th, we have Tuesdays with Tom. He's going to be doing drive-by birding along Dune Road. And we're going to meet in the parking lot at Staples in Riverhead. And we also have a program from the Southold Town Deer Management Committee on February 29th, and details we will be sending out as well. We don't have that one up on our website yet. We're just finalizing that. So anyway, sorry. Now, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to John. Thank you.
Thank you again, Peggy. This talk is part of a talk I've been doing for over 10 years now, every month. And what I try to do is tell people what they're going to see next month and connect it with nature. And that's what I'll try to do today. So I usually start with a nature quote or something. And again, look deep into nature and then you'll understand everything better. Albert Einstein, which I thought is a good little quote. I thank Audubon for inviting me today. And the first, I usually talk about an animal, a bird, and a plant. And the first animal I'm going to talk about, one that a lot of people aren't familiar with, snow fleas. Snow fleas are actually not fleas at all, but a kind of springtail. Because they're tiny and tend to jump, they remind people of fleas, and thus we're given this inaccurate name. And here's a picture of them. And if you just look, all of a sudden they're gone. You focus on one and you'll see it just flies off the screen. Now, they're about the size of a fleck of pepper. If you were to take your pepper jar and spray it out on the snow, that's what it would appear like. And here's a mass of them. There are about 700 species, springtails, in North America, and more than 6,000 worldwide, found on every continent, including Antarctica. And when I read that, I was sort of impressed that I had never even known there was one or two of them, much less 700 in North America. They live in forests, swamps, high in the Himalayas. They can live several feet down into the soil, at the top of trees, and everywhere in between. Springtails are the most abundant tiny animals in the world and are found in huge numbers in nearly every habitat. Snow fleas are wingless insects incapable of flying. They move by walking and also by jumping. But unlike other famous jumping arthropods like grasshoppers or jumping spiders, snow fleas don't use their legs to jump. This little structure here is what they're going to be using. Snow fleas catapult themselves into the air by releasing a spring-like mechanism called a furcula, a sort of tail that's folded underneath its body, ready for action. Furcula in Latin comes, I think, from the word a little fork. Thus the name spring tail. It springs by means of its tail. The furcula is held in place by a clasp-like structure. When released, the furcula thrusts downward, that's the bottom picture, against the substrate, allow the springtail to jump considerable distances. They can jump 100 times their body length. Now think if you're 5 or 6 feet, you'd be jumping 600 feet. On warm and sunny winter days, particularly as we get closer to spring, snow fleas make their way up through the snow, perhaps in search of food. As they gather in numbers on the white surface, flinging themselves from place to place, they often attract our attention. And this gives you a sense of the size of them. They're fairly small. And again, they can become massive. You can see it just turns the snow black in this case. They tend to aggregate on the surface of the snow around the trunks of trees. Often when many snow fleas have gathered together, they are preparing to migrate, probably because the food supply in one area has been exhausted. So they've used up the local supply, so they're getting ready to move somewhere else. And here you can see a mass of them and just their motion. And if you look, they're constantly jumping from one place to another. It's hard to find any one that stays there, and then all of a sudden it just jumps away. Now, unlike fleas, springtails are not parasites. Fleas, most of them are blood-sucking. These are not parasites. They feed on a decaying organic material in the soil, such as leaf litter, and therefore play an important part in natural decomposition. So they're part of the recyclers. They're going to take organic material and process it through them, and their waste will then be added into the soil. So they're decomposing organic material. Snow fleas live in the soil and leaf litter even in the winter months, where they munch away at decaying vegetation and other organic matter. With so few of their usual predators active this time of the year, their numbers can grow explosively. Sometimes they come bubbling up to cover the surface of the snow. And again, if you look at the penny, you can see those little black dots on them. Those are the springtails. Here's a little bit of a close-up. They are perfectly harmless. They don't bite. They can't make you sick. And they won't hurt your plants. And in fact, they're helping improve your soil by breaking down the organic material. Leave them be. Most springtails breathe through their skin or cuticle, which is very permeable to water. Therefore, these insects must spend most of their time in very damp locations. So again, if you look at the picture on the left is a spiracle. That's the opening of a tube going inside insects. And the air is carried in there, and it's transported into the interior part. And it needs a wet surface to migrate across the spiracle into the actual organism itself. It's like our lungs. Our air goes in and our lungs are moist. And the reason they're moist is to allow the oxygen to diffuse from the outside into our bloodstream. So again, we keep it moist inside our lungs. They have to be in a moist environment. Another thing to note about them, Snow fleas don't freeze in the winter. That's why you see them jumping around, thanks to a special kind of protein. This protein is rich in glycine, which is an amino acid. And if you look at the diagram to the left, the top part of the molecule is hydrophobic. That means it doesn't like water. And the bottom part is hydrophilic, which means it likes water. So these molecules get in the way of the water freezing. So the water can't form its natural crystals, and this blocks them. It's an antifreeze, just like glycol that we use in our cars. Amatabolus. Springtails have an amatabolus life cycle, meaning they do not undergo metamorphosis. Springtails do not have nymphal, larval, or pupal stages. So again, they're a little different. They're a special type. Springtails develop by going through a number of molts, just like a horseshoe crab. It has an external exoskeleton. So the exoskeleton is on the outside. It's solid, hard. So the only way you can grow is to shed that particular shell and develop a new one inside and inflate yourself while it's still soft and grow 5 or 10 or 15%. That's the horseshoe crab does that around 14 times until it gets to its large size. So this is called molting. And again, this avoids all of the stages of larval and pupal and all of that. They have several predators, and I previously mentioned the wintertime is a good time because most of these bugs that you see are not flying around or walking around, so that they have an advantage to being able to live a little bit during the winter. That's a little bit of information about snow fleas to whet your appetite to learn more about them. Next, we're going to talk about the northern harrier, the so-called Marsh Hawk. The male, white, black tip wings. I once heard someone explain to me, you can tell the male because the wing tips have been dipped in ink. And you can see that black there. That person also said that the black material that colors that gives more strength to those outer feathers. I'm not sure if that's true, but it sounds good. The female looks like a completely different bird. It doesn't have that same same coloring, but it does have the white patch that you see sitting off the tail. The northern harrier is distinctive from a long distance away, a slim, long-tailed hawk gliding low over a marsh or grassland, holding its wings in a V shape. It has that dihedral. The wings aren't flat like a black vulture is flat right across, but the marsh hawk has that wing up V-shaped. And probably the most identifying thing is that white patch at the base of its tail. It stands out very clearly. You can see it when it's flying around. This is a map, and I tend to disagree a little bit with it, but it's what they say is the case. And again, we show up as a permanent resident. And I think by and large, our harriers come down during the wintertime. We don't see them too often during the middle of summer. But more likely we see them during the winter. They tend to migrate down and become much more common. When I do the bird, I usually use the Christmas bird count. For those who are not familiar with it, this is not a specific number of birds, but it depends on how many people were out looking that one day, how many hours they spent out there, and how many birds they saw. So there's a system of putting those three numbers together so that you can compare year to year. And again, if you're bored and have nothing to do, you can go to Audubon and they have every bird for NYOR, which is the code for New York Orient. And you can find out 100-year cycle of every bird. I've just done the last 25 to show you what's happened. If you go back 50 years, you can see there are more of them and came down. But it's an interesting thing to do with various birds. Because they eat small mammals, northern hares are susceptible to the effects of pesticide buildup. Again, if you put out poison to kill a mouse or a rat and that rat dies, the harrier could pick up the rat and eat it and then run into that same pesticide buildup. Audubon's picture, I have to show that since I received at the last meeting a wonderful book of Audubon birds. It was a pull out of the hat and my name came out. So here's a picture from the Audubon. The North American breeding bird survey records show a steady decline. This was the last time that I looked at it. And you can see it's slowly going down for a cumulative loss of almost 30%. Let me go back. I skipped a picture. Habitat loss. Obviously, we always talk about habitat. Losses contribute to reduce harrier populations. Wetlands have been drained. Monoculture, large fields of just one thing. Farmland has become reforested. Interestingly, you can tell very clearly juveniles and adults. Juvenile males have pale greenish. Juvenile females, dark chocolate brown. And here you can see the bright yellow of the adult. Northern harriers breed. Now, again, we don't see this often because they're mostly up north. And their nests are concealed on the ground in grasses or wetland vegetation. In migration in winter, they typically move south away from those areas and receive heavy snow cover, ending up in open habitats similar to those in which they breed. So that's when they're moving down here. They forage on the wing, cursing low over the ground. Unlike other hawks, they rely heavily on their sense of hearing to capture prey. So they're moving along, and it's the classic picture that you'll see here, that they just fly low. And you can see that white patch really clear on this bird, but they'll soar like this, sometimes 5 or 6 feet above the ground. And then when they see something, they'll make a sudden move and pounce on it. Up close, it has an owlish face that helps it hear mice and voles beneath the vegetation. The disc-shaped face, you can see it here, functions much like an owl's, with stiff facial feathers helping to direct sound to the ears. They hunt mostly small mammals, small birds, but they are capable of taking bigger prey like rabbits and even ducks. Male northern harriers can have as many as 5 mates at once, though most have only 1 or 2. And here you can see the male and the female, beautiful pictures. Breeding northern harriers are most common in large, undisturbed tracts of wetlands and grasslands with low, thick vegetation across Canada and the northern United States. Either the male or the female chooses a site, which is on the ground and usually in a dense clump, such as willows, grasses, reeds, cattails. The male provides most of the food for his mates and their offspring. A northern harrier passes food to his mate. This is a great somebody. I have the name next to it somewhere. But there's passing squirrel right down, and they're going to pick it up in midair. The female incubates the eggs and broods the chicks. The oldest northern harrier was 15 years, 4 months old when it was captured and then released. So it could have been even a little bit longer. Notice the tip of the wings dipped in ink. And that's a little bit about northern harriers. The plant for this month is Staghorn Sumac. And I picked it because not the way it looks during the summer, but the way it looks during the winter. It stands out such a silhouette, but I'll talk about it during all of the seasons. This is the range map. Long Island, in this case, is in the middle of the range. I point out that in many cases, Long Island is at the top range of many, many species. It's also on the bottom range of many, many species. So there's overlap on Long Island. We have an abundance of riches in the sense of we overlap a number of different areas. Staghorn sumac is deciduous shrub, small tree growing to 16 feet tall, 20. Deciduous meaning it loses its leaves. It's not an evergreen. It has alternate leaves. You can see the arrows down there. Alternate simply means that those two petioles, the two leaves coming out, are not directly opposite. There's two families of plants, alternate plants and opposite plants. They are pinnately compound leaves. That speaks to itself. It starts to get finer definitions, putting out all the different leaves. Pinnate just generally comes out, and palmate is like your hand. The leaf stems are densely covered in rust-covered hairs. The velvety texture and the forking pattern of the branches, reminiscent of antlers, have led to the common name Staghorn sumac. So that's where the name comes from. That velvet that deer get on their horns. Staghorn sumac is dioecious. Di meaning two, ecious houses, homes. So they have two different houses, which simply means that a plant is either male or female. There are different plants. One is a male and one is a female plant. They're not on the same plant, in the same flower. The male flower, you can see the bright yellow. They're filled with pollen. And again, without getting too complicated, pollen contains sperm cells. That pollen will float around in the air, carried by bees, however, and will end up on the female part called the stigma. And then the pollen grows a tube down into the ovary and deposits the sperm with the egg. That's called pollination, moving pollen from the male part to the female. But you have to have two different plants in this case. It flowers from May to July. The fruit is one of the most identifiable characteristics, forming dense clusters at the terminal end of the branch. Now, again, the fruit is the result of the sperm fertilizing the egg and the ovary developing. The fruiting head is a compact cluster of round, red, hairy fruits called drupes. Each drupe measures about 1/4 inch in diameter and contains one seed. Each cluster may contain between 100 and 700 seeds. So you're seeing clusters of these. The sumac's tropical green compound foliage assumes fiery shades of orange, scarlet, and gold. They come in very bright shades. Here you see one, here you see another. And here, I think, is the point that during the wintertime, this is what you see as you drive by the road. You'll see those flower heads still standing on top of the branches. Pheasant, bobwhite, turkey, and about 300 species of songbirds include sumac fruit in their diet. And you can see this little chickadee is enjoying a meal. You see the collection of other animals, birds. The plant has become weedy or invasive in some habitats and may displace desirable vegetation if not properly managed. It'll just grow all over. This non-toxic tree's crimson summer berries are once provided thirsty Native Americans and frontier folk with a refreshingly lemon-flavored tea. I just add this. Wild sumac lemonade, free samples. Collected, soaked, and washed in cold water, strained, sweetened, and made into a pink lemonade. Can also be used as a natural dye. The plant is rich in tannins, can be added to other dye baths to improve color fastness. So it has a lot of other things that it's important about. And there's the picture of that staghorn. You can just see something. So again, that's a little bit of information just to get you started into this particular species. So that is a plant, a bird, and an animal. And then what I usually do, and the reason it's called a nature journal, is that Dennis Puleston wrote a book called A Nature Journal. Dennis Puleston was one of the most significant naturalists on the east end of Long Island. He was he was one of the three people who ended up banning DDT from first New York and then through the Supreme Court, the entire United States. So he is an artist also. And these drawings are his. So he has a book in which he shows month by month what you'll see on Long Island. So what I do is I usually show a quote from, in this case, February. We're going into the month of February. One of our most popular winter visitors from the north is the dark-eyed junco, lovingly known as snowbirds by country folk. And again, they're here, they've arrived, they're feeding all over the place now. Even a heavy snowfall brings its benefits, making it easier for the juncos to reach the seeds at the top of weed heads. Ones that might not be able to land on, they're now held by the snow. All the while, they maintain contact with their short chipping calls. And you can hear that. He continues in another spot in the same chapter. The beautifully woven nest of the oriole, well hidden while the leaves were on the trees, is now exposed. And again, this is something, as you walk around during the winter, you'll all of a sudden see these baskets hanging down. Plant fibers, more strands of string, animal hair, fine grasses, grapevine bark are all intertwined into a neat purse-like structure, so well constructed it can survive winter storms. Usually by the spring, it gets very knocked down and falling apart. But at this time, you'll still see them fairly together. The nest is entirely the work of the female. In the fall, the yellow-rumped warbler is one of the latest to leave, and surprisingly, many remain here all winter. There used to be a big flock out at Orient Point, the county park. You would go in there, but a couple of harsh winters seemed to knock them down. I haven't really know if they're that common anymore, but they used to be every year. You could count on them being out there. This bird can readily adapt to a vegetarian diet. Now, obviously, all the insects, or many of the insects, disappear and make it a lot harder to find. You know, woodpeckers have to go through in the wood, you know, that kind of thing, but they're not obviously out and about. So when insects are unavailable and small groups of them can be seen in brushy areas feeding on the berries of bayberry, sumac, poison ivy. And there was a big bayberry patch out at the county park. So that's a little bit from Dennis Puleston. And then finally, I usually end up every month with a column of Paul Stoutenburgh. In this case, just not sure everybody knows, but he wrote, along with his wife Barbara, the Focus on Nature column published in the Riverhead News Review and later the Suffolk Times for 50 years, every week, and retired from writing their column back in 2011. All of those columns are available and searchable. So what I do is I type in, for instance, February, and over the last 40 or 50 years, I get all of his columns that he wrote in February, and I usually pick one out and talk about it. This is a picture later on of Paul and Barbara. Paul died a few years ago. Barbara is still going strong. Years ago, we lived in ignorance. Today, we're informed. With knowledge and the will to do what's right, our world will blossom and keep on returning to us the delicate fragrance of May pinks in the woods, a spring run of flounder for dinner, and ospreys to delight our heart and spirit. It's one of the things that he wrote a few years ago, and I thought was fitting. And this is a picture of Paul at the beach, a sea poppy. Obviously, he's trying to get a great picture of it, and it's typical of what he was always doing. So here's his February 24th, 1983 column. Some time ago, I received an inquiry from Cornell University's ornithology lab asking my help in a crow survey. The plan was to get out in the afternoon and try to locate the various flight patterns of crows, homing in on their evening roost. This is a picture of crows homing in on their roost. They tend to like to come together at night, late afternoon as the sun is going down. Roosting means sleeping and communal means together. So when it grows dark, crows head away from their individual neighborhoods toward communal bedrooms. By sunrise, they are back on their way to your neighborhood. From his column, crows during the winter congregate in these roosts that can number from a few hundred to thousands upon thousands. Years ago, when we had crows here in the North Fork, it was a common sight in the late winter afternoons to see crows beeline it toward home. The biggest roost I can remember was north of Jamesport. Here, back in the 50s, the night rendezvous of all the crows on the North Fork. And what a roost it was. And it was down in Jamesport. All the crows on the North Fork would come there. As time went on, the Jamesport roost was broken up. Some say by gunners, others just by civilization moving too close. The next place I remember seeing them was in the beechwood grove of the North Road between Mattatuck and Cutchogue. Here they reorganized, not as strong, but still in good numbers. Perhaps now only 1,000 birds. Second roost raided. This roost was raided and they had to move again. They moved to a piece of woods on the south side of the road off Cox Lane in Cutchogue. Years passed between these moves. The flock had diminished to just a few hundred crows, yet they still followed the characteristic homing instincts each day. That roost was active until the 70s, and then it too disappeared. So Cornell's asking him to find out if he can find out where they're going. Today, I can find no trace of crows on the North Shore, but that doesn't mean there are none. Should someone know where they are, I would appreciate knowing it. So again, this is back a few years ago. They're trying to find out if there is established a new roost. And just to give you some idea, this is the bird count for the last 50 years. I'll give you some idea. And again, it's a relative, the number on the y-axis, 0 to 12, is not the number of birds. It depends on how many people are out there, how many hours they were out there, etc., and how many birds they see. So he says, there'll always be that person who'll say, what good is a crow? Or what good is that animal or those insects? So he ends his column. To me, there are many, many answers. But to that person, I'd say they are an indicator. When they start to disappear, it is a sign that something is wrong in our natural system, and we better find out what it is and correct it. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer them.
John, did Paul Stoutenburgh say years ago when there were crows? Like, did crows disappear altogether for some period of time out here?
It sounds like from that the numbers dropped down, but when you look at the bird counts on Audubon, they still always were around.
Yeah.
But they're not doing their mass
Roosting. That's so weird because they're always around, but yeah, he's yeah, it's true. I don't remember.
But again, when you talk about thousands and tens of thousands.
Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Well, maybe it's, I'm not getting questions on the bottom of mine, so I can't see.
I don't see. Does anybody have any questions? I didn't see any on the chat. I just commented that you mentioned yellow rump warblers at Orient County Park, and we're going to be doing the walk there next Friday, so maybe we'll see some. But I recall because we started at Orient Point County Park during this year's Christmas bird count, and I believe we did see some yellow rump warblers on that road, you know, between the lighthouse and the ferry there. But I swear to it. But that's
we used to go out every year and see them, and then we had a really cold 2 winters in a row, and we didn't see them, and we just haven't gone back, to be honest. But they're cute little birds.
They are, and nice to see in the winter. Year-round warbler. Does anybody else have any questions?
I have a question because I thought, when did this start? I thought it started at 7:30 and I got on and it's over already.
Oh, is this Margaret? Hi, Margaret. No, it was at 7. Oh dear.
I don't know.
Well, Margaret, we have recorded this, so it'll be on our YouTube channel.
Great. I wanted to see what those black insects are.
Yeah, that was the first thing John talked about. But yeah, I guess you'll have to see it on our YouTube channel. Or John, you're saying that, could you explain again how your recordings of your programs are available on the Peconic Landing?
Yeah, they're not available. You know, they have them. And what I was saying to you, Peggy, is that you might be able to get them and use them for Audubon.
Okay, so I need to talk to them about how we can.
Right. They're not, you know, they don't advertise them.
Sure. I think that's a wonderful idea. So, but in the meantime,
and if anybody wants, I was going to say, if anybody wants to come, I give those talks every last Friday of the month at 4:00 at Peconic Landing, and they're open to the public. Oh. So you would see, it's tomorrow I'm giving one. It's different from this completely and entirely. It's 4:00 Peconic Landing. What Friday, is the last Friday of the month.
What is the program? What is it?
I always have to think of this, Peggy. I'm doing like 4 at the same time. You know what? I'm doing 4 months and I mix them up. But can I get out of share?
It will be interesting. I've gone to many of them. It's so
okay.
I mean, it's a similar format.
Right. I'm just trying to think. Let's see. The house finch is the bird. And how that's taken over things.
Right, has it? Yeah.
I'm mixing them all up because, as I said, I do 3 or 4 months all together. You know, I'm processing them. So I don't remember the others.
Well, anybody can go over there tomorrow afternoon and they can find out.
Right.
I had one more question about the Northern Harrier, because I just saw it was in this month's the Cornell Ornithology magazine, which is such an excellent magazine, Living Bird. And it was an article about, oh gosh, was it short-eared owls? And they were talking about how they've done this research and about the owl having such a great sense of hearing. And they were thinking that probably one of the reasons why it's so great that owls, that when they fly, you can't hear the wings. And so that the owl can be like really quiet, not so that he can sneak up on the vole that he's trying to get under the snow, but so that he can hear the vole.
Ah,
So I'm wondering if
interesting.
I mean, I would think it's a similar thing with the northern harrier, that
That is interesting.
they can glide and they can, glide really quietly so that they can hear. It's not so that the prey, can hear them.
Here's
It's
them coming.
they can hear the prey.
Interesting.
I just thought that was interesting. So they're beautiful birds. And you said that I always wonder because I only see them in the winter.
Right. And the range map, I just tend to disagree with that range map.
Uh-huh. Because you think, I can't remember now what.
Yeah, I think they're forced down by the more snow up north,
Uh-huh.
and they get pushed down.
Uh-huh. Makes sense. So, okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Marianne and Margaret. Oh, Margaret's asking if there's a decrease in crows nationwide.
Hey, what?
Margaret is asking, is there a decrease in crows nationwide? In other words, are their numbers going down? I bet they are, but I don't know.
Yeah.
And then others are, Gail and Marianne are just saying thank you, informative lecture, nicely presented. So, all right, if there's no more questions, then I think we can call it an evening, and we'll have to go over to Peconic Landing tomorrow.
Yeah. All right, Peg.
All right,
And everybody
thank you
else,
so much.
thanks.
All right.